Picture this: before London was a great city, before Paris had cobblestone streets, before the spires of Notre Dame reached toward heaven, there was a place where granite stones were shaped by patient hands, where golden dust gathered in leather pouches, and where the sound of cattle bells echoed across rolling grasslands beneath an endless African sky. The year is 1350. The place is Great Zimbabwe, which in the language of the Shona people simply means house of stone. But what a house it was! Here, on a natural hilltop rising from the gentle plains between two great rivers, stood the largest stone structure ever built in Africa south of the Sahara. Not built by foreign hands, not erected under foreign command, but crafted stone by stone, generation by generation, by the ancestors of people who still call this land home today. This was a city where Chinese porcelain sat alongside hand-thrown clay pots, where copper from distant mountains was shaped into delicate wire jewelry, where ivory carved by local artisans would journey to markets on the shores of the Indian Ocean. A place where the rhythm of daily life moved like the slow, steady beating of ceremonial drums, predictable, purposeful, and deeply connected to the turning of seasons and the whisper of ancestral spirits. In this city of perhaps 15,000 souls, there lived a man we might call Mutindi, though his full name carried the weight of his lineage and the hopes of his ancestors. Each morning, as the first light touched the curved stone walls of the great enclosure, Mutindi would wake to begin another day in the careful, deliberate work that had made Great Zimbabwe the heart of a trading empire, stretching from the mountains of the interior to the coral cities of the coast. Today, let us walk with him through the stone passages of his world. Let us feel the weight of granite blocks in our hands, smell the smoke of cooking fires drifting over mud brick homes, and hear the soft conversation of people living their lives in the shadow of monuments that would outlast empires. This is the story not of kings and battles, but of the gentle persistence of daily life, the quiet satisfaction of work well done, and the deep peace that comes from living in harmony with the rhythms of earth and sky. Come, let us visit a place where time moved differently, where the urgent demands of our modern world had not yet been invented, where a man could spend his entire life perfecting the art of shaping stone, and where the most important conversations happen not in the daylight hours of commerce and craft, but in the blue twilight when the ancestors drew near. Let us go to Great Zimbabwe, in the 14th century, when it was perhaps the richest city in the world, the city of stones. The morning arrives slowly in Great Zimbabwe, the way mornings have arrived for 300 years of settlement on this hill. The sun, still hidden behind the granite outcroppings to the east, sends fingers of golden light through the gaps between the great stone walls, illuminating patches of red earth and casting long shadows that will slowly retreat as the day grows warm. From his place on the woven grass mat that serves as his bed, Mutindi can hear the familiar sounds of the city awakening. Somewhere in the valley below, a woman is grinding grain with the rhythmic scraping of stone against stone. Children's voices drift up from the mud brick houses scattered between the great stone enclosures, not the sharp voices of urgent play, but the sleepy murmur of young ones being gently coaxed into the new day by mothers who have been awake since before dawn, tending cooking fires and preparing the morning meal. The air carries the scent of wood smoke mingled with something else, the faint sweetness of early morning flowers blooming along the stone walls, where seeds carried by birds have found purchase in the joints between the carefully fitted granite blocks. These walls, these magnificent walls that surround and define his world, were not built in his lifetime, nor in his father's lifetime, but grew slowly over generations like the great baobab trees that dot the surrounding landscape. Mutindi sits up on his sleeping mat and looks around the small room that has been his home for the past 12 years. The walls are made of dhaka, the local mixture of clay and earth that, when skilled hands shape it and the sun bakes it, becomes as strong as stone. The floor is packed earth, worn smooth by countless footsteps, and covered with woven mats made from the long grasses that grow in abundance when the rains come. Through the single window, an opening perhaps 2 feet square, positioned to catch the morning breeze, he can see a section of the great curved wall that encircles the royal enclosure. From this angle, the wall appears to rise endlessly upward, its blocks of granite fitted so precisely that not even a blade of grass could slip between them. No mortar holds these stones in place, only the patient skill of the masons who shaped each block to fit perfectly with its neighbors, creating a structure that has already stood for longer than most trees live, and will stand for centuries more. This is the Great Enclosure, the most magnificent of all the stone-walled areas that make up Great Zimbabwe. Its walls curve in a great ellipse, following the natural contours of the hill, and within those walls live the royal family and their closest advisors. From his small home in what people call the Valley Ruins, the area where craftsmen and merchants like himself live, Mutindi can see only portions of the Great Enclosure, but he knows every stone of it, for he has worked on those walls, adding new sections and repairing older ones, for most of his adult life. The granite that forms these walls comes from the hills themselves. The old men tell stories of how the first builders discovered that if you build fires against the rock faces, the heat causes the granite to crack along natural lines, creating rectangular blocks that need only be shaped and smoothed before they can be fitted into place. It is slow work, satisfying work, the kind of work that teaches patience and rewards careful attention to detail. But Mutindi is not a mason, though he understands the craft. His specialty lies elsewhere, in work that requires an even more delicate touch, an even more patient temperament. Mutindi shapes soapstone. The soapstone comes from quarries a half-day's walk from the city, where veins of the soft, workable stone run through the harder granite like green-gray rivers, frozen in time. When freshly cut, soapstone can be shaped with copper tools, carved with patterns, smoothed until it feels like silk beneath the fingers. And when the work is done, when a piece has been shaped and carved and polished, it carries within it a quality that the people of Great Zimbabwe prize above almost everything else. It provides a link between the world of the living and the world of the ancestors. For Mutindi is one of the few craftsmen in Great Zimbabwe trusted with the most sacred work of all. He carves the birds. These are not birds as they might appear to a casual observer, but birds as they appear in the spirit world, stylized, powerful, carrying in their form all the dignity and mystery of the great raptors that circle above the city, the battler eagles that the Shona people call chapungu, and the fish eagles they call hungwi. These birds, the people believe, carry messages between the living and the ancestors, between the world of daily concerns and the eternal realm where the spirits of the dead watch over their descendants. When carved in soapstone and properly consecrated, when placed in the sacred areas of the city where only the royal family and the spiritual leaders may go, these bird sculptures become focal points for communication with the ancestors. They are mounted on tall columns, also carved from soapstone, and they gaze out over the city with the eternal patience of beings who exist outside of time. Mutindi has carved 7 such birds in his lifetime. Each one has taken him months to complete, for the work cannot be hurried. The stone must be approached with respect, shaped with reverence, finished with the understanding that what he creates will outlast his own life by centuries. When he works on a bird sculpture, he works in silence, beginning each day with prayers to his own ancestors and to Mwari, the supreme god who watches over all the Shona people. As he sits in his small room, listening to the city wake around him, Mutindi thinks about the 8th bird, the one he will begin today. The stone for it arrived yesterday, carried from the quarry by bearers who sang softly as they walked, for soapstone is sacred and its transport is ceremony as much as labor. The stone now rests in his workshop, wrapped in soft leather, waiting for his hands to discover the bird that lives within it. But first, there are the morning rituals to observe, the small ceremonies that connect each day to all the days that came before and all that will come after. Mutindi rises from his sleeping mat and walks to a wooden bowl that sits on a shelf built into the wall. The bowl holds water that he carried from the communal well yesterday evening, water that has been blessed by sitting overnight under the light of stars. He cups some in his hands and splashes it on his face, feeling the coolness shock him fully awake. Then he takes a small pinch of red ochre from a leather pouch and mixes it with a few drops of the water, creating a paste that he dabs onto his forehead, a mark that identifies him as one who works with sacred objects, one whose craft serves the spiritual needs of the community. Through his window, he can see that the sun is now visible above the eastern hills, casting the first direct light onto the city. The granite walls catch this light and seem to glow with an inner warmth, transforming the whole settlement into something that appears to be made of gold rather than stone. This is the time of day when Great Zimbabwe looks most like its name suggests, a house worthy of spirits and kings. The city spreads out before him in 3 distinct areas, each serving its own purpose in the complex social fabric of his world. Highest up, on the natural granite outcropping that gives the city its commanding view of the surrounding countryside, sits the hill complex. This is the oldest part of the settlement, the place where the first builders chose to make their home more than 2 centuries ago. It is also the most sacred area, the place where the most important religious ceremonies take place and where the most powerful spiritual leaders maintain their residences. From his position in the valley ruins, Mutindi cannot see much of the hill complex, for it is hidden behind its own walls and partially concealed by the natural rock formations of the hill itself. But he has been there many times, carrying completed sculptures to be installed in the sacred spaces, and he knows its layout well. The paths wind between natural granite boulders and man-made walls, creating a maze-like environment where every turn might reveal a hidden shrine, a carved bird gazing out from its column, or a circular platform where ceremonies older than memory are still performed under the stars. Between the hill complex and his own home in the valley lies the great enclosure, the newest and most impressive of the city's stone-walled areas. This is where the current Mambo, the king, lives with his family, where the most important decisions affecting the entire region are made, where visiting traders from the coast are received and entertained. The great enclosure is dominated by a circular tower that rises more than 30 feet above the surrounding walls, its purpose mysterious to all but the royal family and their closest advisors. Some say the tower is where grain is stored against the possibility of famine. Others whisper that it houses the royal treasury, the accumulated wealth of generations of rulers who controlled the flow of gold from the interior to the coast. Still others believe it serves a purely ceremonial purpose, that its shape, narrow at the base and widening as it rises, represents the connection between earth and sky, between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. Mutindi, who has worked within the great enclosure many times, has his own theory about the tower. He believes it serves all these purposes and more, that it is simultaneously practical and spiritual, a place where grain might indeed be stored but where the act of storing grain becomes itself a kind of prayer for continued abundance. He has seen how the royal family treats every aspect of their daily life as ceremony, how even the simplest actions, the sharing of a meal, the greeting of a visitor, the tending of cattle, are performed with a gravity and attention that transforms the mundane into the sacred. This understanding of the interconnectedness of all things is, he believes, what has made Great Zimbabwe great. It is not simply the wealth that flows through the city, though that wealth is considerable. It is not simply the impressive stone architecture, though those walls are indeed magnificent. It is the way the people of Great Zimbabwe have learned to live in harmony with forces larger than themselves, with the seasonal rhythms of rain and drought, with the ancestral spirits who guide and protect them, with the complex web of relationships that connects their city to communities and kingdoms across the known world. As Mutindi prepares to leave his small home and begin another day of work, he pauses for a moment to offer thanks. Thanks for the stone that will shape itself beneath his hands, thanks for the ancestors who guide his work, thanks for another day in the city that has been his entire world, the only world he has ever needed or desired. The sounds from outside his window have grown more numerous now as the city fully awakens. He can hear the lowing of cattle as herders drive their animals out to the grazing areas that surround the settlement. He can hear the calls of traders setting up their stalls in the markets that operate in the open areas between the stone enclosures. He can hear the rhythmic pounding of grain being processed, the scraping of hoes as gardens are tended, the voices of children playing games that their great-grandparents played on these same dusty paths. But underneath all these sounds, if he listens carefully, Mutindi can hear something else, the profound silence of the stone walls themselves, the patient quiet of granite blocks that have been watching over this place for generations, that will continue to watch long after every person now living has joined the ancestors. It is a comforting sound, this silence, a reminder that some things endure, that not everything in the world is subject to the rapid changes and urgent demands of daily life. In this silence, in this sense of continuity and permanence, Mutindi finds the peace that allows him to approach his sacred work with the proper frame of mind. Today he will begin to shape the eighth bird, to coax from raw stone another messenger between worlds. The work will take months to complete, and he will approach it one day at a time, one careful cut at a time, with the patience that the stone itself has taught him. But first, he must eat, for even sacred work requires the sustenance of the body. And so Mutindi wraps a cloth around his waist, ties leather sandals to his feet, and steps out into the soft golden light of morning in Great Zimbabwe, ready to begin another day in the slow, careful rhythm of a life lived in service to something greater than himself. The rhythm of days, daily life and chronology. The path from Mutindi's home to the communal cooking area winds between several other dhaka houses, each built in the traditional circular style with a conical roof of thatch that sheds the seasonal rains and provides cool shade during the hot months before the rains arrive. The spaces between houses are not random but carefully planned, creating small courtyards where families gather in the evenings, where children play during the day, where the community life of the valley ruins unfolds in countless small interactions. As he walks, Mutindi exchanges quiet morning greetings with his neighbors. Here is Nahanda, an elderly woman who specializes in weaving the fine grass mats that serve as currency in some local transactions. She sits beside her doorway, her weathered hands already busy with the intricate work of turning long grass fibers into patterns that will, when completed, tell stories of the seasonal rains and the flights of birds. Her fingers move with the automatic precision of decades of practice, barely needing the guidance of her eyes, leaving her free to watch the morning activities of her neighbors and offer occasional words of advice or encouragement. "The stone spirits are quiet this morning," she says to Mutindi as he passes, a reference to the fact that no sounds of hammering or cutting are yet coming from the area where the masons work. A good day to begin something new. Mutindi nods his acknowledgement of her words. Nahanda is known for her ability to read the subtle signs that indicate whether the day ahead will be favorable for various kinds of work. She notices things that escape other people's attention: the direction of the wind, the behavior of birds, the quality of light as it strikes the stone walls. Her observations, accumulated over 70 seasons of life in Great Zimbabwe, have proven accurate often enough that people seek her counsel when planning important undertakings. A few houses further along the path, he encounters Chipo, a young mother, carrying water from the communal well. Her infant daughter is strapped to her back with a colorfully woven cloth, content to ride along as her mother goes about the business of the day. The baby's eyes, dark and serious, meet Mutindi's for a moment, and he makes the small gesture of blessing that adults traditionally offer to children, a gentle motion of the hand that invokes the protection of the ancestors for the young ones who represent the future of the community. "May your work today honor those who came before," Chipo murmurs as she passes, using the traditional greeting offered to craftsmen whose work serves spiritual purposes. It is a reminder that Mutindi's carving is not simply a job or a way to earn his living, but a form of service that connects the present generation to the eternal realm of the ancestors. The communal cooking area occupies a large cleared space at the center of the valley ruins, surrounded by several permanent fire pits where large clay pots simmer throughout the day. This is where the unmarried men and women of the community take their meals, where visiting traders are fed, where special ceremonial foods are prepared for religious festivals. The married women of each household typically maintain their own cooking fires nearer to their homes, but the communal area serves as a social center where news is shared, plans are made, and the complex web of relationships that holds the community together is maintained through countless small interactions. The woman in charge of the morning meal preparation is Mukoma, a large, cheerful person whose laugh can be heard across the settlement when something particularly amusing captures her attention. She has been supervising the communal kitchen for more years than Mutindi has been carving stone, and her knowledge of which foods are appropriate for which occasions, which ingredients go well together, and how to stretch provisions when unexpected guests arrive, has become legendary throughout Great Zimbabwe. "Mutindi," she calls out when she sees him approaching. "You look like a man preparing for important work. Sit, let me give you something that will keep your hands steady and your mind clear." Without waiting for his response, she ladles a portion of the morning porridge into a wooden bowl. The porridge is made from sorghum grain, ground fine and cooked slowly with water drawn from the deep wells that never fail, even in the dry season. To this basic mixture, Mukoma has added honey from the wild bees that nest in the granite outcroppings, dried fruit from the trees that grow along the seasonal streams, and a small amount of ground groundnut that gives the meal its rich, satisfying flavor. Mutindi accepts the bowl with both hands and the appropriate words of gratitude. The porridge is still warm, heated by coals that have been burning in the cooking fire since before dawn. As he eats, he listens to the quiet conversations going on around him. Two young men discuss the condition of the paths leading to the gold-bearing streams in the hills to the north. An elderly woman describes the dream she had the previous night, seeking interpretation from others who might understand its significance. A group of children, too young to be given formal responsibilities but old enough to be helpful, receive instructions for the day's tasks from their elders. The conversations flow around him like a gentle stream, requiring no effort on his part to follow, demanding no response unless he chooses to offer one. This is one of the pleasures of life in Great Zimbabwe, the sense that he is part of a community so well established, so comfortable with its rhythms and traditions, that individual participation can be as active or as quiet as the moment requires. When he has finished eating, Mutindi returns his bowl to the washing area, where other bowls and utensils soak in large clay pots filled with water and sand that will scrub them clean. The washing is done by rotation, with different members of the community taking responsibility for this task on different days. Today it is the turn of several teenage girls, who chatter and laugh as they work, their voices adding to the pleasant background of community life. Now fed and properly greeted by his neighbors, Mutindi is ready to begin the walk to his workshop. This building sits somewhat apart from the residential area, positioned near the walls of the great enclosure where he can receive materials and visitors from the royal compound while still maintaining the quiet concentration that his work requires. The workshop is larger than his living quarters, with high walls that provide good ventilation and several windows positioned to catch the best light during different parts of the day. As he approaches the workshop, Mutindi can see that someone has already been there before him. Sitting on a wooden stool beside the doorway is Mbuyajiru, the oldest of the spirit mediums who serve the royal family. Her presence here means that today's work will be particularly significant, that the carving of the 8th bird is to begin under circumstances of special spiritual importance. Mbuyajiru is a small woman, probably nearing her 80th season, with white hair braided in the intricate patterns that indicate her status as an interpreter between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. Her eyes, though clouded with age, seem to see things that escape younger people's notice. When she speaks, her voice carries the authority of someone who has spent decades learning to listen to voices that most people cannot hear. The ancestors have been restless in their dreams, she says without preamble as Mutindi approaches. They are eager for the new messenger to take its place among the others. This is both an honor and a responsibility. If the ancestors themselves are anticipating the completion of this sculpture, then Mutindi's work takes on an importance beyond what he had expected. Each bird he has carved has been significant, each one carefully blessed and consecrated before being installed in its sacred location. But if this bird is especially desired by the ancestors, then every cut he makes, every detail he shapes, must be approached with even more care and reverence than usual. Mbuyajiru rises from her stool with the careful movements of advanced age and follows Mutindi into the workshop. The interior is spacious and well organized, with wooden shelves holding his various tools, clay pots containing pigments and polishing compounds, and several work surfaces at different heights to accommodate projects of different sizes. Near the largest window sits the leather-wrapped package that contains the soapstone for the 8th bird. Together, they unwrap the stone with the ceremonial care that such moments require. The soapstone is a beautiful piece, larger than most Mutindi has worked with, its gray-green surface smooth and unmarked by any flaws or impurities. As they remove the final layer of leather, both of them can see that this stone has been chosen with exceptional care. Its proportions, its color, its natural grain all suggest that it will yield a sculpture of unusual beauty and power. Mbuyajiru places her hands on the stone and closes her eyes, remaining silent for several minutes while she listens for whatever guidance the ancestors might offer. When she finally opens her eyes and removes her hands, she nods with satisfaction. They are pleased, she says simply. This bird will watch over the royal compound from the highest point of the hill complex. It will see all that approaches Great Zimbabwe and carry word of it to the ancestors. This information tells Mutindi several important things about the work ahead. If the bird is destined for the hill complex, it will need to be carved with particular attention to the details that will remain visible when viewed from below. If it will serve as a guardian for the entire city, watching for approaching friends or enemies, then its expression must convey both welcome and warning, both hospitality and strength. But most importantly, if this bird is intended for the highest point of the hill complex, then it will join the most sacred congregation of sculptures in all of Great Zimbabwe. The 3 birds already installed there are among the oldest and most revered artifacts in the city, carved by master craftsmen of previous generations, and blessed by spirit mediums whose names are still spoken with reverence. To add a 4th bird to this grouping is an honor that few craftsmen receive in their lifetimes. After Ambuyajiru leaves, carrying with her the ceremony and weight of ancestral expectations, Mutindi spends the rest of the morning simply contemplating the stone. He does not yet touch it with his tools, does not make any marks upon its surface. Instead, he studies it from every angle, turning it slowly in the shifting light from the windows, learning its natural characteristics, beginning to envision the bird that waits within it. This is perhaps the most important part of the entire process, this period of quiet observation and planning. The Shona carvers have a saying, the stone teaches the carver, not the other way around. What this means is that each piece of stone has its own nature, its own preferred form, and the carver's job is not to impose his will upon the material but to discover what the stone itself wants to become. As the morning progresses and the light in the workshop changes, Mutindi begins to see possibilities. The natural grain of this particular piece of soapstone runs in lines that could suggest the folded wings of a great raptor. A slight irregularity in the surface might, with careful shaping, become the curve of a powerful beak. The proportions of the stone block are such that the finished bird could stand taller than any he has previously carved, its presence commanding even more respect and attention. But these are still only possibilities. Before he begins any actual cutting, Mutindi will spend several more days in contemplation and prayer, seeking guidance from his own ancestors and asking for the skill to honor the expectations that now rest upon his work. He will visit the hill complex to study the 3 existing birds, noting how they relate to each other and to their surroundings. He will speak with the masons who will eventually install the finished sculpture, learning about the specific site where it will stand and the architectural considerations that might influence its design. The work of creating a sacred bird sculpture is not simply about carving stone. It is about understanding the spiritual needs of the community, the expectations of the ancestors, the requirements of the site where the bird will spend eternity watching over the city. It is about becoming, for the duration of the work, a kind of spiritual medium himself, allowing the ancestors to guide his hands in creating something that serves purposes beyond the purely artistic. As the sun reaches its zenith and the heat in the workshop begins to build, Mutindi carefully rewraps the stone and sets it aside. The afternoon hours are not suitable for beginning such important work. Instead, he will spend them on other tasks, maintaining his tools, organizing his workspace, perhaps working on smaller projects that require less spiritual preparation. But first, he steps outside into the bright midday light and looks up toward the hill complex, where the 3 existing birds stand on their columns, invisible from his position but present in his awareness like distant relatives whose existence provides comfort even when they cannot be seen. Soon, if his work proves worthy, a 4th bird will join them there, carrying the prayers and petitions of the living to the ancestors, bringing back guidance and protection from the eternal realm. The thought is both inspiring and daunting. But as Mutindi stands in the sun outside his workshop, listening to the peaceful sounds of the city going about its midday business, he feels the familiar calm that comes when he knows himself to be in exactly the right place, doing exactly the work he was born to do. This is what it means to live in Great Zimbabwe in the 14th century, to be part of a community so stable, so well-ordered, so in harmony with the natural and spiritual worlds that each person can devote their life to perfecting their particular craft, knowing that their work serves purposes larger than themselves and will be remembered by generations not yet born. Afternoon interlude, the golden trade. As the afternoon heat reaches its peak, Mutindi decides to visit the goldworking quarter of the city, partly to check on some smaller commissions he has in progress there, partly to observe the techniques that might be useful in adding Decorative details to the bird sculpture, but mostly to immerse himself in the steady, meditative rhythms of the city's most important industry. The path from his workshop to the goldworking area leads through the heart of the commercial district, where traders from throughout the region gather to exchange goods and information. The market stalls are constructed of wood and thatch, temporary structures that can be easily moved or reconfigured as needs change. But though the buildings may be temporary, the commerce that takes place here follows patterns established over generations, creating a kind of organized chaos that newcomers find bewildering but that local residents navigate as easily as they walk the paths between their homes. Here, a trader from the coastal settlements displays beads of glass in colors that have no names in the Shona language, blues like the deep ocean that no one from Great Zimbabwe has ever seen, reds like tropical flowers that bloom only in distant lands, yellows like sun shining through amber, greens like the depths of underwater caves. These beads, each one small enough to hold in the palm of a hand, represent journeys of thousands of miles, passing through the hands of dozens of intermediaries before arriving at their final destination in the markets of Great Zimbabwe. There, a merchant from the northern regions offers copper ingots, their surfaces green with the patina that develops during the long journey from the mining areas to the city. The copper will be melted down and recast by the local metalsmiths, transformed into jewelry, ceremonial objects, and the wire that is prized for its decorative applications. Some of the copper will be alloyed with tin imported from even more distant sources, creating bronze for tools and weapons that are both functional and beautiful. Near the center of the market area, a group of ivory carvers works in the shade of a large tree, their hands busy with tasks requiring enormous skill and patience. The ivory they work comes from the great elephants that still roam the forests and grasslands surrounding Great Zimbabwe, though in smaller numbers than in previous generations. Each piece of ivory represents not just the life of a magnificent animal but also the dangerous skill of the hunters who tracked and killed it, the strength of the bearers who carried the heavy tusks back to the city, and the economic relationships that will eventually carry the finished carvings to wealthy buyers in lands across the ocean. But it is the sound of the goldworking district that draws Mutindi forward, the rhythmic tapping of small hammers against metal that creates a kind of industrial music, a percussion section accompanying the larger symphony of city life. The sound grows louder as he approaches the area where the goldsmiths have their workshops, a collection of small buildings positioned near the royal compound, where security is tightest and the work can be properly supervised by the king's representatives. Gold has been the foundation of Great Zimbabwe's wealth for as long as anyone can remember. It comes from streams in the granite hills that surround the city, where patient workers pan the gravel in shallow baskets, searching for the tiny flakes and nuggets that, when accumulated grain by grain over months and years, create the wealth that has made the city famous throughout the known world. But the gold that arrives in Great Zimbabwe is only raw material. Its real value emerges through the skilled hands of craftsmen who transform it into objects of beauty and significance. Some of the gold is beaten into thin sheets that can be applied to other materials, creating ceremonial masks and decorative objects that gleam like captured sunlight. Some is drawn into wire so fine it seems to be spun from light itself, wire that can be woven into cloth or worked into jewelry that appears to be made of solidified flame. The most skilled goldsmiths create objects of such beauty and complexity that they are treasured not just for their material value but as works of art that demonstrate the highest achievements of their craft. These pieces, intricate bracelets that tell stories in their patterns, pendants that incorporate symbols meaningful to the ancestors, ceremonial vessels used in the most important religious rituals, represent the pinnacle of what human hands can achieve when guided by generations of accumulated knowledge and inspired by purposes greater than mere profit. As Mutindi enters the goldworking district, he is greeted by Tongai, a master craftsman whose reputation extends far beyond the borders of Great Zimbabwe. Tongai is perhaps 10 years older than Mutindi, with hands that show the careful scars that come from decades of working with tools and hot metal. His workshop is larger than most, reflecting both his senior status and the complexity of the projects he undertakes. Brother, Tongai says, using the term that craftsmen employ when addressing others whose work serves the spiritual needs of the community. I hear you begin a new bird today. News travels quickly in Great Zimbabwe, especially news involving work that touches on the sacred aspects of community life. Mutindi nods, unsurprised that Tongai already knows about the morning's events. Not today, he replies. Today I listen to the stone. Tomorrow, perhaps, I begin to shape it. Brother, Tongai says, using the term that craftsmen employ when addressing others whose work serves the spiritual needs of the community. I hear you begin a new bird today. News travels quickly in Great Zimbabwe, especially news involving work that touches on the sacred aspects of community life. Mutindi nods, unsurprised that Tongai already knows about the morning's events. Not today, he replies. Today I listen to the stone. Tomorrow, perhaps, I begin to shape it. Brother, Tongai says, using the term that craftsmen employ when addressing others whose work serves the spiritual needs of the community. I hear you begin a new bird today. News travels quickly in Great Zimbabwe, especially news involving work that touches on the sacred aspects of community life. Mutindi nods, unsurprised that Tongai already knows about the morning's events. Not today, he replies. Today I listen to the stone. Tomorrow, perhaps, I begin to shape it. Tongai approves of this approach with a small nod. Like Mutindi, he understands that the most important work cannot be rushed, that quality emerges from patience and care rather than from speed and efficiency. Would you like to see something that might interest you? Tongai asks, gesturing toward his workbench. I have been commissioned to create gold detailing for one of the shrine installations in the hill complex. Perhaps there is something here that would complement your new bird. This is precisely the kind of collaboration that makes Great Zimbabwe function so effectively as a center of artistic and spiritual achievement. Each craftsman specializes in his own particular skill, but the most impressive projects require the coordination of multiple crafts, multiple sets of knowledge and experience. A bird sculpture might be carved from soapstone, but its installation might require stone columns crafted by the masons, gold detailing provided by the metalsmiths, ceremonial blessing by the spirit mediums, and approval by the royal administrators who oversee all work conducted in the sacred areas of the city. On Tongai's workbench lies a piece of gold work so fine it seems impossible that human hands could have created it. The gold has been beaten into sheets thin enough to reveal the texture of the cloth beneath when laid over fabric, then cut into shapes that interlock like the feathers of a bird's wing. Each individual piece is no larger than a child's fingernail, but when assembled they create patterns of extraordinary complexity and beauty. This will be mounted on a wooden framework that represents the tree of life. Tongai explains, pointing to various elements of the design. The gold represents the eternal nature of the ancestors' protection, the way their care surrounds and supports all life in the community. Mutindi studies the work with the appreciation of one craftsman examining another's achievement. He can see that each piece of gold has been shaped not just for its individual beauty but for its contribution to the overall design. The project represents months of careful work, but more than that, it represents the kind of thinking that considers how each element relates to every other element, how the finished piece will function both as decoration and as spiritual instruction. For those who see it, beautiful work, he says, and means it. Then, after a moment of thought, he adds, I wonder if the bird I am beginning might benefit from some small gold details. Nothing elaborate, just touches that would catch the light, help it communicate with the sun spirits. This kind of conversation, craftsmen discussing possibilities with craftsmen, each bringing his particular expertise to bear on a common problem, represents the collaborative approach that has made Great Zimbabwe's art and architecture so sophisticated and impressive. No single person designs these major projects. Instead, they emerge from the collective wisdom and experience of multiple specialists, each contributing what he does best to achieve results that exceed what any individual could accomplish alone. Tongai considers the suggestion, his eyes taking on the slightly distant expression that craftsmen develop when they are visualizing possibilities not yet made. Physical, small details, he muses. Perhaps just in the eyes, to suggest the bird's ability to see into the spiritual realm. Or tiny pieces worked into the texture of the feathers, to suggest the way sunlight moves across a living bird's wings. They spend the next hour examining Tongai's work, discussing techniques and possibilities, sharing the kind of professional knowledge that is passed from master craftsman to apprentice but rarely written down or formally recorded. This is how knowledge accumulates and spreads in Great Zimbabwe, through conversations like this one, through collaborations that require each participant to explain his methods and thought processes to others, through the informal network of relationships that connects everyone involved in the city's artistic and spiritual life. As the afternoon light begins to slant more sharply through the workshop windows, Mutindi prepares to continue his tour of the city. But before leaving, he accepts Tongai's invitation to observe the evening ritual that takes place in the goldworking district, a ceremony that few outsiders ever see. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the goldsmiths gather their day's work and arrange it on a large cloth spread in the courtyard outside Tongai's workshop. The pieces they have created during the day, some finished, some still in progress, some barely begun, are laid out in patterns that reflect their spiritual as well as their artistic significance. The arrangement is not random, but follows principles that relate to the movement of the sun, the directions associated with various ancestral spirits, and the symbolic meanings embedded in different types of objects. When everything has been properly arranged, the craftsmen form a circle around the display and offer prayers of gratitude for the day's work, prayers for guidance in the work that remains to be done, and prayers for the protection of the ancestors over the precious materials they have been trusted to shape. The gold glows in the soft light of the setting sun, creating an almost magical effect that transforms the courtyard into something that appears to be illuminated from within. This daily ceremony serves multiple purposes. It ensures that the spiritual dimensions of the work are never forgotten, even when the craftsmen are focused on technical challenges and practical problems. It creates a sense of community among the goldsmiths, reminding them that their individual efforts contribute to the larger spiritual and economic well-being of Great Zimbabwe. And it provides a formal conclusion to each day's work, a way of marking the transition from labor to rest that helps maintain the rhythms and patterns that give structure to community life. As the ceremony concludes and the craftsmen begin to pack away their work for the night, Mutindi reflects on what he has seen and learned during the afternoon. The collaboration between different crafts, the attention to spiritual as well as aesthetic considerations, the daily rituals that connect individual work to community values, all of these elements will inform his approach to carving the eighth bird. But more than that, the afternoon has reinforced his understanding of what makes Great Zimbabwe function so effectively as a community. It is not just the impressive stone architecture or the wealth that flows through the city's markets. It is the way every aspect of life here is connected to every other aspect, the way individual skills and knowledge are shared and combined to achieve collective goals, the way practical work and spiritual purpose are woven together into a seamless whole. As he walks home through the gathering dusk, past the familiar stone walls that glow warmly in the last light of the day, Mutindi feels the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing himself to be part of something larger and more permanent than any individual life. Tomorrow he will begin to shape the eighth bird, guided by everything he has learned today and by the accumulated wisdom of all the craftsmen who have worked in Great Zimbabwe before him. Tonight, he will sleep peacefully, knowing that the work he is about to undertake is exactly the work he was born to do, in exactly the place where he was meant to do it. Evening, the rhythm of seasons. The evening meal in Great Zimbabwe unfolds according to rhythms established over generations, rhythms that change subtly with the seasons but maintain their essential character throughout the year. Tonight, as Mutindi makes his way back to the communal eating area, the air carries the particular quality of light and temperature that indicates the dry season is beginning to give way to the time of rains. The change is subtle, perceptible mainly to those who have spent their entire lives learning to read the language of sky and wind, but it is there nonetheless. The sun seems to hang a little longer in the western sky before beginning its descent. The evening breeze carries a different scent, suggesting moisture gathering somewhere beyond the horizon. The cattle, grazing in the grasslands surrounding the city, move with a particular restlessness that the herders recognize as anticipation of the seasonal changes ahead. For the people of Great Zimbabwe, the approach of the rainy season is cause for both celebration and careful preparation. The rains bring life to the crops that sustain the city, fill the streams where gold is found, provide the water that must last through the following dry season. But the rains also bring challenges. Flooding that can damage buildings, erosion that can threaten the carefully constructed stone walls, isolation that can disrupt the trade routes on which the city's prosperity depends. As he approaches the communal cooking area, Mutindi can see that tonight's meal reflects the seasonal transition. The large clay pots suspended over the cooking fires contain not just the usual sorghum porridge and vegetable stews, but also special dishes prepared to honor the ancestors who control the rains. There is beer made from fermented grain, its preparation time to coincide with the lunar cycles that influence both agricultural and spiritual activities. There are roasted nuts gathered from trees that fruit only at this time of year. There are dried meats that have been carefully preserved since the last hunting season, now brought out to provide protein for the ceremonies that will soon begin. The gathering around the cooking fires is larger than usual tonight, reflecting both the importance of the seasonal transition and the news that has been circulating throughout the day about Mutindi's new commission. Word of the 8th bird has reached all corners of the city, and people who normally take their evening meal at their own homes have come to the communal area to offer their support and to participate in whatever blessings might be appropriate for such an important undertaking. Seated near the largest fire, her white hair gleaming in the firelight, is Ambuya Juru, the spirit medium who visited Mutindi's workshop that morning. Around her gather several other elderly women whose knowledge of traditional ceremonies and seasonal observances makes their presence essential at occasions like this. These women serve as the community's living library, the repositories of information about which rituals are appropriate for which circumstances, which food should be prepared for which ancestors, which songs and dances will properly honor the spirits whose favor is being sought. As the community settles into the comfortable patterns of evening conversation, one of the young men begins to tell a story. This is Blessing, a herder whose work with the cattle herds gives him opportunities to travel throughout the region surrounding Great Zimbabwe, bringing back news from other settlements and encounters with traders from distant places. 3 days' walk to the north, Blessing begins, his voice pitched to carry clearly. In the still evening air, I met a trader from the coast who spoke of ships from land so far away that the journey takes more than a full season. These ships carry goods that no one in our grandfather's time had ever seen, cloth that changes color in different light, spices that preserve food for longer than a person can live, tools made from metals that never rust or break. This kind of storytelling serves multiple purposes in the social life of Great Zimbabwe. It provides entertainment during the quiet evening hours when the day's work is done but the time for sleep has not yet arrived. It shares information about the wider world that might affect trade opportunities or security considerations. And it reinforces the community's understanding of their place in the larger network of relationships that connects Great Zimbabwe to cities and kingdoms across the known world. But tonight's stories have a particular focus. As the evening progresses, the conversation turns repeatedly to themes of permanence and change, of traditions that endure and innovations that enhance them. The approaching rainy season, the commissioning of a new bird sculpture, the reports of goods and ideas arriving from distant places, all of these elements combine to create a mood of anticipation, a sense that Great Zimbabwe stands at a moment of transition that could prove to be particularly significant. Old Kairemba, a master mason whose hands shaped some of the most impressive sections of the great enclosure walls, offers his own contribution to the evening's conversation. His voice, roughened by decades of stone dust but still strong, carries the authority of someone whose work has literally shaped the physical environment in which the community lives. When I was young, he says, my grandfather told me that the stones themselves would teach me what I needed to know. He said that the granite of these hills had been waiting for generations for the right people to come along and shape it into something worthy of the ancestors. He said that the stones were patient, but they were also selective. They would only reveal their secrets to people who approached them with the proper respect and understanding. He pauses to sip from a wooden cup containing the mildly fermented beer that is traditional for evening gatherings. Around the fire, the other listeners wait respectfully for him to continue, understanding that the words of experienced craftsmen are not to be hurried or interrupted. I have been thinking about those words as I watch the young masons learning their trade, Kairemba continues. And I have been thinking about them as I hear of the new bird that will soon take its place among the guardians of our city. The stones that will support that bird, the column that will lift it toward the sky, these Stones must be chosen and shaped with the same care that goes into carving the bird itself. Everything must work together, everything must serve the same purpose. This observation leads to a discussion of the collaborative nature of major projects in Great Zimbabwe, the way different craftsmen must coordinate their efforts to achieve results that serve both practical and spiritual purposes. Mutindi finds himself drawn into the conversation, describing his morning's encounter with Mbuyajuru and his afternoon's visit to the goldworking district. As he talks, he becomes aware that the evening's gathering is serving as an informal planning session for the work ahead. The spirit medium offers suggestions about the timing of various phases of the project, noting which lunar phases will be most favorable for different kinds of work. The master mason discusses the technical requirements for installing a sculpture at the highest point of the hill complex, explaining the foundation work that will need to be completed before the bird itself can be positioned. A representative from the royal compound shares information about the ceremonial requirements that must be observed when sacred objects are moved through the different areas of the city. But the planning is conducted without urgency, without the sense of pressure or deadline that might characterize similar discussions in other places. In Great Zimbabwe, important work is understood to take the time it takes. The ancestors are patient, the stones are patient, and the community has learned to be patient as well. Quality is more important than speed, spiritual appropriateness more important than efficiency. As the evening progresses and the fire settles into glowing coals, the conversation gradually shifts from planning and practical considerations to the stories and traditions that provide the cultural context for all work in Great Zimbabwe. One of the elderly women begins to sing, her voice wavering with age but still carrying the haunting melodies that have been passed down through generations of mothers and daughters. The song she chooses is one that tells of the first bird sculpture ever carved in Great Zimbabwe, created by a craftsman whose name has been forgotten but whose work set the standard for all the bird sculptures that followed. According to the story, this first bird was carved not from soapstone but from a piece of granite, so hard that it took an entire season just to shape it into rough form. But when the work was completed, the bird was so lifelike, so perfectly balanced between the physical and spiritual realms, that the ancestors themselves were said to have blessed it with the ability to fly to the spirit world and return with messages for the living. The song is long and complex, with verses that describe the carver's technique, the challenges he faced, the guidance he received from the ancestors, and the installation ceremony that finally brought his work to its proper home in the sacred areas of the city. As the woman sings, others around the fire join in during the choruses, their voices weaving together in harmonies that seem to draw the evening darkness closer around them, creating an intimate space where the boundaries between past and present, between living and ancestors, become permeable and fluid. When the song ends, the gathering continues in comfortable silence for a while, each person absorbed in their own thoughts about the work ahead, about their place in the long chain of tradition that stretches back to the first inhabitants of Great Zimbabwe and forward to generations not yet born. The fire has burned down to coals that pulse gently in the evening breeze, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the faces gathered around them. One by one, people begin to take their leave, offering final words of encouragement to Mutindi and traditional blessings for the work he is about to undertake. The elderly women are helped to their feet by younger family members and escorted back to their homes, their white hair and careful movements making them appear almost ghost-like in the dim light. The craftsmen shake hands with the grave formality that characterizes their relationships with each other, partnerships built on mutual respect and shared understanding of the importance of their work. As the gathering disperses, Mutindi finds himself walking back toward his home in the company of Kairemba, the old mason. The path leads through areas of the city that are completely dark now except for the occasional glow from doorways, where families are concluding their own evening activities. The stone walls that dominate the daytime landscape are invisible now, their presence marked mainly by the way they channel and redirect the night breezes, creating currents of cooler air that provide relief from the day's accumulated heat. The young ones do not always understand, Kairemba says as they walk, his voice barely audible above the sound of their footsteps on the hard-packed earth of the path. They think that building with stone is about making things that will last forever. But that is only part of it. The real purpose is to create something that serves as a bridge between the temporary and the eternal, between the world we can see and touch and the world where the ancestors dwell. Mutindi nods, understanding that the old man is offering him guidance that extends beyond the technical aspects of craftsmanship. The bird he is about to carve must indeed be built to last, must be shaped from materials and assembled with techniques that will allow it to survive for generations. But its true purpose is to serve as a focal point for communication with forces and entities that exist outside of time altogether. When they reach the point where their paths diverge, Kairemba places a hand on Mutindi's shoulder in the traditional gesture that elder craftsmen use to pass on their blessing to younger ones. The ancestors have chosen well, he says simply. Trust your hands, trust the stone, and trust the wisdom that your teachers have given you. Everything else will take care of itself. Alone now, Mutindi completes the short walk to his home, his mind already turning to the work that will begin tomorrow. But as he prepares to settle onto his sleeping mat, he steps outside once more to look up at the stars that shine so brilliantly in the clear air above Great Zimbabwe. The same stars that shine down on the coastal cities where traders are loading ships with goods destined for lands across the ocean. The same stars that illuminate the gold-bearing streams where workers will return tomorrow to continue their patient search for the flakes and nuggets that fund the city's prosperity. The same stars that have watched over Great Zimbabwe for all the generations of its existence and will continue to watch long after everyone now living has joined the ancestors. Under these stars, craftsmen before him have carved birds that still stand guard over the sacred areas of the city. Under these stars, his own work will unfold according to rhythms that have been perfected over generations of patient practice. Under these stars, the eighth bird will slowly emerge from raw stone, taking its place in the long tradition of art that serves purposes greater than mere decoration. The night air is cool and still, carrying the faint sounds of the city settling into sleep, the low conversations of families concluding their evening activities, the soft lowing of cattle in the distance, the occasional call of a night bird from the granite outcroppings that surround the settlement. These sounds, too, are part of the rhythm that has sustained Great Zimbabwe for centuries, the gentle pulse of a community at peace with itself and its place in the world. Tomorrow the work will begin in earnest, but tonight is for rest, for dreams, for the quiet preparation that allows both mind and spirit to approach important tasks with proper focus and reverence. Tonight is for the kind of deep sleep that comes to those who know themselves to be exactly where they belong, doing exactly the work they were meant to do, in service to purposes that will outlast their individual lives. As Mutindi finally settles onto his sleeping mat, the last thought that crosses his mind before sleep takes him is a simple prayer of gratitude, for the stone that will guide his hands, for the ancestors who will guide his spirit, for another day in the city that has given meaning and purpose to his entire life, the eternal work, resolution and reflection. 3 months have passed since that evening when Mutindi first learned of his commission to carve the eighth bird. 3 months of careful work, of patient shaping, of daily communion with the soapstone that has gradually revealed the form hidden within it. The rainy season has come and gone, bringing the yearly miracle of renewed life to the grasslands and gardens that surround Great Zimbabwe, filling the streams and wells that sustain the city, washing the dust from the stone walls until they gleam like jewels in the African sun. Now, as the dry season begins its return, the eighth bird nears completion. Mutindi stands in his workshop in the early morning light, studying the sculpture that has occupied his hands and thoughts for all these months. The bird is larger than any he has previously carved, standing nearly 3 feet tall when measured from the base of its supporting column to the crown of its elegantly curved head. Its wings are folded against its body in the posture of alert repose that characterizes the great raptors when they perch on high places, watching the world spread out below them. But this is not simply a representation of a living bird. Like all the sacred sculptures of Great Zimbabwe, it embodies qualities and characteristics that belong more to the spirit world than to the physical realm. Its proportions are slightly elongated, giving it an otherworldly quality that suggests its ability to move between different levels of reality. Its surfaces are covered with subtle patterns that catch and reflect light in ways that make the stone appear to be alive, breathing gently in the shifting illumination of the workshop. Most importantly, its eyes, carved with particular care and enhanced with tiny flecks of gold provided by Tongai the metalsmith, seem to possess the kind of intelligence and awareness that transcends mere artistic representation. These eyes appear to see, not just in the ordinary sense of detecting light and movement, but in the deeper sense of perceiving meaning and significance in everything they observe. The bird's feet rest on a cylindrical column that Mutindi carved from the same piece of soapstone, creating a unified sculpture that will stand more than 6 feet tall when installed in its final location. The column is decorated with patterns that represent the connection between earth and sky, between the world of daily life and the realm of the ancestors. These patterns flow and interweave like the currents of wind that carry the eagles through their aerial domain, creating a visual rhythm that draws the eye upward from the base of the sculpture to the bird's noble head. As he examines his work in the morning light, Mutindi feels the particular satisfaction that comes when a long project approaches completion. Every surface of the sculpture shows the effects of countless hours of careful attention. Every detail reflects decisions made not just on aesthetic grounds but with full consideration of the spiritual purposes the finished piece will serve. This is not just a carved stone, it is a focal point for communication with forces larger than human understanding, a bridge between worlds that must be worthy of the trust placed in it. But satisfaction is mixed with anticipation and, if he is honest with himself, a touch of anxiety. Today, representatives from the royal compound will come to examine the finished sculpture and determine whether it meets the standards required for installation in the hill complex. Tomorrow, if the bird receives approval, it will be transported to its final location and installed with ceremonies that will officially bring it to life as a sacred object. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupts his contemplation. Through the window of his workshop, he can see a small procession making its way along the path from the great enclosure. At its head walks Mbuyajiru, the spirit medium, whose blessing initiated this project. Behind her come several other figures whose presence indicates the importance of the occasion, representatives of the royal family, master craftsmen from other disciplines, and spiritual leaders whose knowledge of traditional ceremonies will be essential if the sculpture is to be properly consecrated. Mutindi opens the door of his workshop and steps outside to greet his visitors with the formal courtesies appropriate to such an occasion. The procession approaches with the deliberate pace that characterizes all important ceremonies. In Great Zimbabwe, each participant moving with the gravity and attention that demonstrates their understanding of the significance of the moment. Mbuyajiru speaks first, her aged voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. The ancestors have been patient, she says, but they are eager to welcome the new messenger into their service. May we see what your hands have shaped from their gift of stone? The formal language of the request acknowledges that the soapstone itself is understood to be a gift from the ancestors, that Mutindi's role as carver is that of an intermediary who helps reveal what was always present within the raw material. This understanding infuses the entire process of creating sacred art in Great Zimbabwe, the recognition that individual skill and creativity are important, but they must always be exercised in service to purposes that transcend personal achievement. Mutindi leads the group into his workshop, where the 8th bird waits in the shifting light from the windows. As the visitors arrange themselves around the sculpture, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the evaluation they are about to undertake, the workshop falls into the kind of profound silence that indicates the presence of something significant. For several minutes, no one speaks. Each member of the group studies the sculpture from different angles, noting its proportions, its surface details, its overall impact as a work of art and spiritual significance. This is not a casual examination but a thorough assessment conducted by people whose understanding of such matters has been refined through decades of experience with similar objects. Finally, one of the royal representatives steps forward, an elderly man whose elaborate headdress and finely woven clothing mark him as someone of considerable authority within the palace hierarchy. His examination of the sculpture is particularly thorough, as he will bear responsibility for reporting back to the king on whether the work meets royal standards. The proportions are correct, he says at last, his voice carrying the measured tones of official evaluation. The craftsmanship is worthy of its intended location. The spiritual essence appears to be properly embodied in the physical form. This formal approval is followed by more detailed observations from other members of the group. The master mason examines the supporting column and pronounces it suitable for the installation challenges ahead. A representative of the Goldworking Guild admires the subtle metal details that enhance without overwhelming the stone carving. The spirit mediums discuss among themselves the positioning of various elements and their correspondence to traditional spiritual symbolism. But it is Mbuyijuru who provides the most important assessment. As the oldest and most respected of the spirit mediums, her evaluation carries special weight in determining whether the sculpture will be accepted for sacred use. She approaches the bird sculpture slowly, her hands extended as if she is feeling for some quality that cannot be perceived through ordinary senses. When she reaches the base of the column, she places both palms against the stone and closes her eyes, remaining motionless for several minutes while she listens for whatever guidance the ancestors might provide. When she finally opens her eyes and steps back, her face shows the kind of satisfaction that indicates spiritual as well as artistic approval. They are pleased, she announces simply. The new messenger is ready to take its place among the guardians of Great Zimbabwe. This declaration officially concludes the evaluation process and initiates the preparations for tomorrow's installation ceremony. The royal representative discusses the practical arrangements, the timing of the transport, the sequence of rituals that will accompany the bird's journey from workshop to sacred site, the specific individuals who will be responsible for various aspects of the ceremony. The master mason describes the foundation work that has already been completed at the installation site, explaining how the sculpture will be positioned and secured to ensure its stability through the seasonal cycles of rain and drought, that it will endure for centuries to come. The spirit mediums coordinate the spiritual aspects of tomorrow's activities, ensuring that all necessary blessings will be properly conducted and that the bird's transition from crafted object to sacred guardian will be accomplished according to traditions that have governed such ceremonies for generations. As these practical discussions unfold, Mutindi finds his attention drifting between the details of tomorrow's ceremony and the broader meaning of what he has accomplished. The eighth bird represents more than 3 months of intensive work. It embodies the accumulated knowledge and skill that he has developed over decades of apprenticeship and practice. It carries the hopes and expectations of a community that has entrusted him with one of its most important spiritual commissions. But perhaps most significantly, it represents his contribution to a tradition that stretches back to the earliest days of Great Zimbabwe and will continue long after his own life has ended. The bird he has carved will stand guard over the city for generations, serving as a focal point for prayers and ceremonies that will connect future inhabitants of Great Zimbabwe with the ancestors and spirits who watch over them. When the official evaluation concludes and the visitors prepare to return to their various responsibilities, Mbuyijuru remains behind for a few moments of private conversation with Mutindi. Her presence in his workshop has become familiar over the months of the project, as she has served as spiritual advisor and intermediary with the ancestors throughout the process. Tomorrow your work moves beyond your hands, she says, her voice carrying both congratulation and gentle warning. Once the bird takes its place in the hill complex, it will belong not to you but to the community and the ancestors. This is both an honor and a responsibility. The prayers that people offer in its presence, the guidance it provides to those who seek its help, all of this becomes part of your legacy, but also part of your obligation to the spiritual welfare of Great Zimbabwe. Mutindi nods his understanding. The completion of the sculpture marks not just the end of a project but a transition in his relationship to his own work. While the bird bears the mark of his craftsmanship, its higher purpose transcends individual achievement and enters the realm of community service and spiritual function. After Mbuyijuru departs, Mutindi spends the rest of the day in final preparations for tomorrow's ceremony. He cleans and organizes his workshop, removing the stone chips and polishing dust that accumulated during the months of carving. He prepares the special wrapping materials that will protect the sculpture during its transport from workshop to installation site. He gathers the tools and supplies he will need for any final adjustments that might be required once the bird reaches its permanent location. But these practical activities occupy only a portion of his attention. As he works, his mind returns repeatedly to the larger questions that have shaped his entire approach to this project. What does it mean to create art that serves spiritual purposes? How does individual skill relate to community need? What are the Responsibilities that come with the ability to shape objects that will outlast their creators and influence the spiritual lives of people not yet born? These are questions that have no easy answers, questions that each generation of craftsmen must address in their own way based on their own understanding of their relationship to their community and their ancestors. For Mutindi, the process of carving the eighth bird has provided an opportunity to deepen his understanding of these fundamental issues, to refine not just his technical skills, but his sense of purpose and responsibility as well. As the afternoon light begins to slant more sharply through the workshop windows, Mutindi makes one final inspection of his completed work. The bird stands ready for its journey, its surfaces glowing softly in the golden light, its gold-enhanced eyes seeming to return his gaze with a kind of intelligent awareness that suggests it has already begun to assume its role as guardian and messenger. Tomorrow this sculpture will take its place among the most sacred objects in Great Zimbabwe, joining the three birds that have stood guard over the hill complex for generations. Tomorrow the work of his hands will become part of the spiritual landscape that shapes the daily lives of everyone in the city. Tonight, for the last time, the eighth bird belongs entirely to him, the product of his skill and dedication, the embodiment of everything he has learned about working with stone and serving the needs of his community. Tonight he can look at his work with the private satisfaction of a craftsman who knows he has given his best effort to an important task, who has honored the trust placed in him by creating something worthy of the purposes it will serve. But tonight is also for preparation, for the prayers and meditations that will ready his spirit for tomorrow's ceremonies, for the final offerings to the ancestors who have guided his work from its beginning. Tonight is for the kind of deep gratitude that comes when a person realizes he has been allowed to participate in something larger and more meaningful than his individual life, something that will continue to serve his community long after he himself has joined the ancestors. As the sun sets behind the granite hills that surround Great Zimbabwe, casting the stone walls of the city in warm shades of gold and red, Mutindi offers his thanks for the stone that revealed its secrets to his hands, for the ancestors who guided his work, for the community that entrusted him with this sacred commission, for another day in the place where he has spent his entire life in service to purposes greater than himself. Tomorrow the eighth bird will begin its eternal vigil over the city. Tonight, Mutindi rests in the deep peace that comes to those who have completed important work with skill and reverence, who have contributed their part to the continuing story of Great Zimbabwe, the city of stone that has become home to some of the most beautiful and meaningful art ever created in Africa. Installation dawn, the bird takes flight. The morning of the installation ceremony arrives with the particular quality of light that comes just before the rainy season, when the air holds a promise of moisture, and the granite walls of Great Zimbabwe seem to glow from within. Mutindi wakes before dawn, as has become his custom during important transitions, and spends the quiet hours before sunrise in meditation and preparation for the day ahead. Today the eighth bird will make its final journey, from the familiar surroundings of his workshop to the sacred heights of the hill complex where it will stand guard over Great Zimbabwe for generations to come. The transport and installation will require the coordinated efforts of numerous specialists, masons to guide the placement, spirit mediums to conduct the blessing ceremonies, representatives of the royal family to ensure that all protocols are properly observed, and bearers whose strength and skill will ensure that the sculpture arrives safely at its destination. But before the practical work can begin, there are rituals to be observed, prayers to be offered, and spiritual preparations to be completed. These ceremonies serve multiple purposes. They honor the ancestors whose guidance made the project possible, they invoke protection for all who will participate in the day's activities, and they formally transfer the sculpture from the realm of individual craftsmanship to the sphere of community spiritual practice. As the first light touches the eastern hills, Mutindi begins the process of preparing the bird for transport. The sculpture must be wrapped in specially prepared cloths that will protect it from damage while also maintaining its spiritual integrity during the journey. The wrapping is itself a ceremony, conducted according to traditions that specify which materials may be used, how they should be applied, and what prayers should accompany each step of the process. The cloths he uses are made from fibers grown in the gardens surrounding Great Zimbabwe, spun by women whose families have specialized in this work for generations, and dyed with colors that carry symbolic meaning in the spiritual Traditions of the Shona people. The first layer is white, representing the purity of intention that must accompany all sacred work. The second is red, symbolizing the life force that the sculpture will channel in its role as intermediary between worlds. The final layer is black, acknowledging the mystery and power of the ancestral realm that the bird will help make accessible to the living. As he wraps the sculpture, Mutindi is joined by several other participants in the ceremony. Mbuyijuru arrives first, carrying the ritual items she will need for the blessing ceremonies: small calabashes containing sacred water, pouches of ceremonial herbs, and the carved sticks that serve as symbols of her authority as a spirit medium. Her presence transforms the workshop from a place of individual labor into a sacred space where community spiritual practice unfolds. The master mason Kairemba arrives with several of his assistants, bringing the specialized tools and equipment needed to install the sculpture on its designated site in the hill complex. These men have spent the past week preparing the foundation, ensuring that the base is perfectly level and properly aligned with the astronomical and spiritual considerations that govern the placement of such important objects. Representatives from the royal compound arrive in formal procession, their elaborate dress and ceremonial bearing indicating the high importance that the palace places on today's activities. Their presence ensures that the installation will be conducted with all the dignity and protocol appropriate to a sculpture destined for the most sacred areas of the city. Finally, the bearers arrive, 6 strong men selected for their skill in transporting precious objects and their understanding of the spiritual significance of their work. These men have carried other sacred sculptures along the same route, and their experience ensures that the 8th bird will make its journey safely despite the challenges posed by the narrow paths and steep inclines that lead to the hill complex. When all the participants have assembled, Mbuyijuru conducts the opening ceremony, a ritual that formally begins the day's activities and invokes the protection and guidance of the ancestors. The ceremony is conducted in the ancient language of the Shona people, using words and phrases that connect the present moment to all the similar occasions that have preceded it throughout the history of Great Zimbabwe. With the blessings completed, the practical work of transport begins. The wrapped sculpture is carefully lifted onto a specially constructed litter that distributes its weight evenly among the 6 bearers. The litter itself is a work of art, carved from hardwood and decorated with patterns that echo the motifs found on the bird sculpture. Its design reflects the same attention to spiritual as well as practical considerations that characterizes all aspects of life in Great Zimbabwe. The procession that forms to accompany the sculpture to its destination includes not just the essential participants but also representatives from throughout the community. Craftsmen from other guilds come to honor the completion of an important work by one of their colleagues. Families whose homes lie along the route gather to witness the passage of the new guardian that will watch over their city. Children who have been told of the sculpture's significance by their elders walk alongside the procession, understanding that they are witnessing an event they will remember and describe to their own grandchildren decades in the future. The route from Mutindi's workshop to the hill complex follows paths that have been used for ceremonial procession since the earliest days of the settlement. The paths wind between the stone walls of the various enclosures, past the residential areas where most of the population lives, through the commercial district where traders from distant regions come to exchange goods and information, and finally up the steep inclines that lead to the sacred heights of the hill complex. As the procession moves slowly through the city, it gathers additional participants and observers at each stage of the journey. The measured pace allows word of the sculpture's passage to spread ahead of the procession, so that people have time to stop their daily activities and offer their respects to the new guardian. The bearing of the litter requires careful coordination among the 6 carriers, who must adjust their steps to accommodate the changing terrain while maintaining the stability that prevents damage to the precious cargo they bear. The path becomes steeper as the procession approaches the hill complex, winding between natural granite outcroppings and the ancient stone walls that define the sacred areas of the settlement. Here, the architecture becomes more elaborate and the spiritual significance more intense. Every stone in these walls has been placed with consideration not just for structural requirements but for symbolic meaning. Every path has been designed to create specific experiences for those who walk along it, guiding them gradually from the ordinary concerns of daily life toward the heightened awareness appropriate for communion with the ancestors. As the procession enters the hill complex proper, the pace becomes even more deliberate. The bearers move with extraordinary care over the uneven surfaces of the ancient pathways, while the spirit mediums begin the chants and prayers that will accompany the final stages of the installation ceremony. The sound of their voices, echoing off the granite walls and rock faces, creates an acoustic environment that seems to transform the entire area into a kind of natural cathedral. The installation site occupies the highest accessible point of the hill complex, a platform carved from the living granite of the hill itself and enhanced with carefully fitted stone blocks that create a level surface perfectly suited for the placement of sculptural monuments. From this elevated position, the eighth bird will have an unobstructed view in all directions, allowing it to serve as guardian not just for the hill complex but for the entire city of Great Zimbabwe and the surrounding countryside. The three existing bird sculptures stand on their columns nearby, having occupied this sacred space for generations. Each is unique in its details while conforming to the same basic design principles that govern all such work in Great Zimbabwe. Together, they create a presence that seems to watch over the city with eternal vigilance, their stone forms embodying the protective care of the ancestors for their living descendants. The arrival of the eighth bird at its destination marks the beginning of the most elaborate phase of the installation ceremony. The sculpture must be unwrapped with the same care and ritual attention that characterized its preparation for transport. Each layer of protective cloth is removed with specific prayers and offerings, revealing the sculpture gradually in a process that symbolizes its emergence from the realm of individual craftsmanship into the sphere of community spiritual practice. When the sculpture finally stands revealed in its full glory, the assembled participants pause for several minutes of silent appreciation. The morning light plays across its carefully carved surfaces, highlighting the subtle details that reflect months of patient work. The gold accents in the bird's eyes catch the sunlight and seem to glow with an inner fire, suggesting the spiritual illumination that the sculpture will provide to those who seek its guidance. The actual installation requires precise coordination between the mason's crew and the bearers who have transported the sculpture to its destination. The bird must be positioned exactly according to the astronomical alignments that govern the placement of all sacred objects in Great Zimbabwe. Its orientation relative to the cardinal directions, its relationship to the existing sculptures, and its alignment with various features of the surrounding landscape have all been calculated in advance to ensure that the spiritual functions of the sculpture will be properly supported by its physical placement. As the masons work to secure the sculpture in its permanent position, the spirit mediums conduct the consecration ceremonies that will officially bring it to life as a sacred object. These rituals, conducted in the ancient language of spiritual practice, invoke the presence of the ancestors and formally request their acceptance of the new messenger that has been created in their honor. The ceremonies continue throughout the morning and into the early afternoon, as each aspect of the sculpture's spiritual function is properly blessed and activated. By the time the rituals are complete, the eighth bird has been transformed from a beautifully carved piece of soapstone into a fully consecrated guardian spirit, ready to begin its eternal vigil over Great Zimbabwe. As the formal ceremonies conclude and the various participants begin to disperse back to their daily responsibilities, Mutindi remains for a few moments alone with his completed work. The sculpture stands now in its permanent home, silhouetted against the sky like a living bird that has chosen to rest on this high place while surveying the territory it protects. From this vantage point, the entire city of Great Zimbabwe spreads out below, its stone walls and residential areas creating a complex pattern of human activity set against the natural landscape of granite hills and seasonal grasslands. In the distance, the trade routes that connect the city to the wider world stretch toward horizons that hold kingdoms and cultures beyond counting. Ships carrying goods from Great Zimbabwe have already reached ports on the Indian Ocean, carrying with them the products of local craftsmanship to markets in Arabia, Persia, India, and China. But all of this vast network of relationships and exchange ultimately depends on the spiritual foundations that give meaning and purpose to the material prosperity. The bird sculptures that watch over Great Zimbabwe, including now the eighth bird that Mutindi has carved, serve as constant reminders that true wealth consists not just in gold and trade goods but in the proper relationship between the living and the ancestors, between human ambitions and divine purposes. As the afternoon light begins to slant across the hill complex, casting long shadows among the stone monuments and granite outcroppings, Mutindi offers his final prayer of gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to this ancient tradition. The work of his hands will endure long after he himself has joined the ancestors, continuing to serve the spiritual needs of Great Zimbabwe for generations yet to come. Tonight he will sleep with the deep satisfaction of one who has completed important work well, who has honored the trust placed in him by his community and his ancestors. Tomorrow he will return to his workshop to begin other projects, other contributions to the ongoing artistic and spiritual life of Great Zimbabwe. But the eighth bird will remain here on its high perch, watching over the city through all the seasons and years ahead, carrying prayers to the ancestors and bringing their guidance back to the living, serving as an eternal link between the temporary concerns of daily life and the enduring values that give meaning to human existence. As the sun sets behind the western hills, the last light of the day touches the eighth bird's upturned head, creating a moment of perfect illumination that seems to bring the carved stone briefly to life. In that moment, watching from the shadows below, Mutindi sees not just the product of his own craftsmanship but a guardian spirit awakening to begin its eternal watch over the city he has always called home. The work is complete. The tradition continues. Great Zimbabwe endures, protected by its stone guardians and sustained by the endless patience of those who understand that the most important things in life cannot be hurried, cannot be forced, but must be allowed to unfold in their own time according to rhythms older than memory and more enduring than stone. Eternal twilight, the long watch begins. Years pass in Great Zimbabwe like water flowing over granite, slowly, gently, leaving traces that accumulate into permanence. The eighth bird has stood in its place through 7 rainy seasons and 7 dry seasons, watching the sun rise and set more than 2,000 times, observing the gradual changes that mark the passage of time in a city built to endure. Mutindi has grown older during these years, his hands marked by the accumulated experience of countless hours working with stone, his understanding deepened by the satisfaction of seeing his work serve its intended purpose. He has carved other sculptures since completing the eighth bird, smaller pieces, mostly for private shrines and family ceremonies, work that continues to connect him to the spiritual life of his community while allowing him to explore new techniques and possibilities. But it is the eighth bird that remains his masterwork, the sculpture that has established his reputation throughout the region as a craftsman whose work embodies the highest traditions of Great Zimbabwe. Traders from the coast speak of it when they return to their home cities. Visitors from other settlements describe it when they share stories of their travels. The bird has become part of the growing legend of Great Zimbabwe itself, adding to the city's reputation as a center of artistic achievement as well as material prosperity. From its vantage point high in the hill complex, the eighth bird has witnessed changes both subtle and dramatic. It has watched the city's population grow as the success of the gold trade attracts new residents from throughout the region. It has seen new stone walls added to the existing enclosures, expanding the space available for residential and commercial activities. It has observed the arrival of trade goods from increasingly distant sources, objects that speak of relationships extending far beyond anything the previous generation could have imagined. But the bird has also observed the continuities that give Great Zimbabwe its essential character. The seasonal rhythms continue unchanged, with the rains arriving at their appointed time each year, bringing renewal to the grasslands and streams that sustain the city's prosperity. The ceremonial calendar unfolds according to patterns established by the ancestors, marking the passage of time, with rituals and celebrations that connect each generation to all those that came before. The crafts traditions continue as well, with new apprentices learning ancient techniques from master artisans who carry forward the accumulated wisdom of centuries of practice. Mutindi has taken on apprentices of his own during these years, young men whose eagerness to learn reminds him of his own early enthusiasm for the work that has shaped his entire life. Teaching them has required him to articulate knowledge that he had previously held almost unconsciously, to find words for techniques and approaches that he had learned through years of patient observation and practice. One of his current apprentices shows particular promise. Tafara is perhaps 20 years old, with the kind of natural feeling for stone that cannot be taught but must be recognized and nurtured. His hands seem to understand the nature of different stones almost without conscious thought, and his eye for proportion and detail suggests that he may someday create works that surpass even those of his teacher. On this particular evening, as the dry season reaches its height and the first subtle signs of the coming rains begin to appear in the sky, Mutindi and Tafara stand together in the workshop, examining a piece of soapstone that will become the younger man's first major project. The stone is not as large or fine as the one from which Mutindi carved the eighth bird, but it is substantial enough to challenge all of Tafara's developing skills and provide an opportunity for him to demonstrate his readiness to take on increasingly important commissions. Remember, Mutindi says, his voice carrying the patient tone he has developed. During years of teaching, the stone will teach you what it wants to become. Your job is not to impose your will upon it but to listen carefully to what it is telling you, to work with its natural characteristics rather than against them. Tafara nods, his young face serious with concentration as he studies the stone from multiple angles, beginning the process of visualization that must precede any actual carving. Mutindi recognizes the expression. It is the same look of absorbed attention that he himself wore decades ago when first learning to approach sacred work with the proper reverence and care. The ancestors will guide your hands, Mutindi continues, but only if you approach the work with the right spirit. This is not just stone you are shaping, but a link between worlds, a bridge between the temporary and the eternal. Every cut you make, every surface you smooth, every detail you create will be seen by people not yet born, will carry prayers to ancestors not yet called to the spirit realm. As the evening light fades and the two men prepare to conclude their work for the day, they step outside the workshop to look up toward the hill complex where the bird sculptures stand silhouetted against the darkening sky. From this distance, the individual birds are barely visible, but their presence can be felt, a sense of watchful protection that has become so much a part of life in Great Zimbabwe that it is noticed mainly when circumstances call attention to it. Do you think, Tafara asks, his young voice carrying the kind of philosophical curiosity that Mutindi remembers from his own apprentice years, that the birds we carve truly carry our prayers to the ancestors, or are they simply beautiful objects that help us focus our own spiritual intentions? It is the kind of question that has no simple answer, the kind of inquiry that each craftsman must resolve for himself based on his own understanding and experience. Mutindi considers his response carefully, remembering similar conversations with his own teachers, recalling the gradual development of his own beliefs and understanding over years of working with sacred objects. Perhaps, he says finally, those are two ways of describing the same thing. If the birds help us focus our spiritual intentions with greater clarity and reverence, if they provide focal points for prayers that might otherwise scatter like seeds on rocky ground, then perhaps they do indeed carry our prayers to the ancestors, not because of any magic in the stone itself but because of the intention and understanding we bring to our relationship with them. It is an answer that raises as many questions as it resolves, but that seems appropriate for mysteries that touch on the fundamental nature of the relationship between the physical and spiritual worlds. Such questions cannot be answered definitively through logical analysis but must be lived through, explored through years of experience and reflection. As they walk home through the familiar paths of the city, past the stone walls that glow softly in the light of the rising moon, Mutindi reflects on the changes that have marked the years since he completed the eighth bird. His own understanding of his craft has continued to deepen, influenced by the experience of teaching others and by the ongoing observation of how his sculptures function in their sacred roles. He has seen people approach the eighth bird in moments of particular need. Parents seeking guidance for sick children, young adults facing important decisions, elders preparing for their own transition to the ancestral realm. He has watched the quiet rituals of offering and prayer that unfold around the sculpture, observed the peaceful expressions that often appear on the faces of those who spend time in contemplation before it. These observations have reinforced his understanding that the true purpose of his work extends far beyond artistic achievement or even spiritual symbolism. The sculptures serve as focal points for the community's ongoing relationship with forces and meanings that transcend individual concerns. They provide continuity, and stability in a world where individual lives are temporary but collective. Purposes endure across generations. The city of Great Zimbabwe itself embodies these same principles on a larger scale. Its stone walls and elaborate architecture represent the accumulated efforts of generations of builders, craftsmen, and leaders who understood that they were creating something intended to outlast their individual lives. The trade networks that connect the city to distant markets, the agricultural systems that sustain its population, the spiritual practices that give meaning to its prosperity, all of these represent forms of investment in permanence, contributions to patterns of life that transcend the temporary concerns of any single generation. But permanence, Mutindi has learned, is not the same as stagnation. Great Zimbabwe continues to grow and change, adapting to new opportunities and challenges while maintaining the fundamental characteristics that define its identity. New trade routes open as political conditions change in distant regions. New techniques are developed as craftsmen learn from interaction with visitors from other cultures. New ceremonies are added to the spiritual calendar as the community's understanding of its relationship with the ancestors continues to evolve. The eighth bird has been witness to all of these changes, standing in its high place with the patient watchfulness that characterizes all great art created in service of enduring purposes. It has seen traders arrive with goods from lands so distant that their names exist only in the stories told by the most far-traveled merchants. It has observed the construction of new walls and buildings that expand the city's capacity while maintaining its essential character. It has watched children grow to adulthood, take on the responsibilities of their community, and eventually join the ancestors whose protection it helps to invoke. Through all of these changes, the bird has maintained its role as guardian and messenger, providing a focal point for prayers and offerings, serving as a visible reminder of the invisible connections that link the living with the eternal realm of the ancestors. Its presence has become so integrated into the spiritual landscape of Great Zimbabwe that visitors often comment on the sense of peace and protection that seems to pervade the entire city. As Mutindi approaches his home on this particular evening, he pauses for a moment to look back toward the hill complex, where the eighth bird maintains its eternal vigil. The sculpture is invisible in the darkness, but its presence remains palpable, a sense of watchful protection that extends over the entire city like a blessing that renews itself with each passing day. Tomorrow will bring new work, new challenges, new opportunities to contribute to the ongoing life of Great Zimbabwe through the patient practice of his craft. But tonight is for rest, for the deep satisfaction that comes to those who understand that their individual efforts serve purposes larger than themselves, who have learned to find meaning not in personal achievement alone but in participation in traditions that connect each generation to all those that came before and all those yet to come. The sounds of the city settling into evening quiet drift through the warm air, the soft conversations of families concluding their daily activities, the distant lowing of cattle in the grasslands beyond the walls, the gentle rustle of wind through the thatch roofs and stone passages that give Great Zimbabwe its distinctive acoustic signature. These sounds, too, are part of the pattern of life that the eighth bird watches over, part of the complex web of relationships and activities that the sculpture helps to protect and preserve. As Mutindi finally settles onto his sleeping mat, his last conscious thought is a simple prayer of gratitude for another day in the city that has given meaning to his entire life, for the opportunity to continue serving his community through the practice of his sacred craft, for the enduring presence of the ancestors whose protection surrounds Great Zimbabwe like the stone walls that define its physical boundaries. In the hill complex, the eighth bird continues its watch through the hours of darkness, its stone form silhouetted against the star-filled sky that stretches over the African continent. The same stars that shine down on the coastal cities where Great Zimbabwe's gold purchases passage to markets across the ocean. The same stars that illuminate the northern hills where new deposits of precious metal await discovery by future generations of miners. The same stars that have watched over this land since time immemorial and will continue to shine long after the last stone of Great Zimbabwe has crumbled back to the earth from which it came. But that time lies far in the future, beyond the reach of present imagination. Tonight, the city rests secure under the protection of its stone guardians, sustained by the patient work of craftsmen like Mutindi, connected to the eternal realm of the ancestors through the mediation of sculptures that embody the highest achievements of human skill in service of divine purposes. Tonight, all is well in Great Zimbabwe, the city of stone that has become one of the greatest monuments to human creativity and spiritual understanding ever erected. On the African continent, the eighth bird stands guard, the ancestors watch over their descendants, and the gentle rhythms of a life lived in harmony with forces larger than individual understanding continue their eternal dance beneath the African stars. Closing, the eternal present. And so the years continue to flow like a quiet river past the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, carrying with them the gentle repetition of seasons, the slow accumulation of human achievement, and the patient wisdom of those who understand that the most important things in life cannot be hurried but must be allowed to unfold in their own time. Mutindi has grown old now, his hands marked by a lifetime of patient work with stone, his understanding deepened by decades of service to purposes larger than himself. His workshop continues to echo with the soft sounds of apprentices learning ancient techniques, carrying forward traditions that stretch back to the first craftsman who discovered that stone could be shaped into forms that serve as bridges between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. The eighth bird still maintains its vigil from the heights of the hill complex, its stone form weathered slightly by the passage of seasons but essentially unchanged, as permanent as human skill can make anything in a world where permanence itself is temporary. From its elevated position, it continues to watch over Great Zimbabwe as the city slowly transforms around it, growing larger, becoming more prosperous, extending its influence over an ever-widening region, but always maintaining the essential characteristics that have made it a center of artistic and spiritual achievement. On quiet evenings, when the day's work is done and the sun settles behind the granite hills that surround the city, Mutindi sometimes walks slowly up the paths that lead to the hill complex, making the pilgrimage to visit the sculpture that represents the culmination of his life's work. He moves more carefully now than in his younger years, but his step remains steady, guided by the certainty of someone who knows exactly where he belongs and why he is there. Standing before the eighth bird in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the three older sculptures that have watched over Great Zimbabwe for generations, Mutindi often reflects on the nature of the work that has given meaning to his entire life. The carving of sacred sculptures is not simply about artistic achievement, though the beauty of the finished pieces brings joy to all who see them. It is not simply about preserving tradition, though the techniques and understanding passed from generation to generation provide continuity and stability in a changing world. Most fundamentally, the work of creating sacred art is about service to the community that provides the craftsman with support and materials and guidance, service to the ancestors whose wisdom continues to inform the choices made by the living, service to purposes and meanings that transcend individual lifetimes and connect each person to the great ongoing story of human existence. On this continent, in this place, under these enduring stars, the eighth bird, standing silent in the African twilight, embodies all of these forms of service. Its stone form will endure long after Mutindi himself has joined the ancestors, continuing to provide a focal point for prayers and ceremonies that connect future generations of Great Zimbabwe's inhabitants to the spiritual sources of their strength and identity. Its presence will remind them, as it has reminded their predecessors, that true wealth consists not just in gold and trade goods but in the proper relationship between human ambitions and divine purposes. As the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above Great Zimbabwe, the eighth bird takes its place in the eternal present that encompasses all times and seasons, all generations past and future, all the countless individual lives that have contributed their small portions of effort and understanding to the great collective achievement that is this city, this civilization, this ongoing testimony to the human capacity for creating beauty and meaning in partnership with forces larger than individual understanding. Mutindi, standing quietly in the shadows below, offers his nightly prayer of gratitude for the stone that revealed its secrets to his hands, for the ancestors who guided his work, for the community that trusted him with sacred responsibilities, for the opportunity to spend a lifetime in service to something greater and more enduring than himself. In the gathering darkness, the distinction between craftsman and creation, between individual achievement and collective purpose, between the temporary concerns of daily life and the eternal meanings that give them significance, begins to blur and fade. What remains is the simple fact of service properly rendered, of work completed with reverence and skill, of a life lived in harmony with the rhythms that have sustained human community in this place for generations. Beyond counting, the eighth bird maintains its watch. The ancestors offer their protection. The city of Great Zimbabwe rests secure under the African stars, sustained by the patient work of craftsmen who understand that the most important things cannot be hurried, cannot be forced, but must be allowed to unfold according to their own inherent timing and wisdom. And now, as the stars trace their ancient paths above the stone walls and granite hills of this remarkable city, may you too find rest in the quiet understanding that some things endure, that beauty and meaning can be created by human hands, guided by purposes larger than individual ambition, that the gentle rhythms of a life lived in service to community and ancestors provide a kind of peace that no amount of worldly success can equal. Let your thoughts drift slowly back through time, past the urgent demands of the present moment, past the complications and anxieties that seem so important in the harsh light of day, to rest finally in the deep quiet of a place where time moves differently, where the most important work is done with patience and reverence, where the sound of stone being shaped by careful hands provides a gentle percussion for dreams that connect the temporary and the eternal. Sleep now, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of the African night, the eighth bird continues its watch, carrying your prayers to the ancestors, bringing their peace back to settle over your restless spirit like a blanket woven from starlight and the accumulated wisdom of generations who understood that the best work, the most enduring achievements, the deepest satisfaction, all come to those who learn to listen to the voice of something greater than themselves and respond with the offering of their whole hearts. The work continues. The tradition endures. The city of stone remains, protected by its guardians, sustained by the patience of those who understand that some things are worth preserving across the centuries, worth the lifelong dedication of individuals whose names may be forgotten but whose contributions live on in the beauty they created and the meaning they served. Rest now, in the eternal present of Great Zimbabwe, where the eighth bird keeps its vigil and the ancestors watch over all who seek the deep peace that comes only to those who have learned to live in harmony with purposes larger than themselves.